Is calling it African American English an act of academic respect or a not so subtle form of segregation? For decades, we've argued over whether recognizing a distinct black way of speaking American English is a way of validating a rich cultural heritage or just a polite way of lowering the bar, the racism of low expectations. Today, we're unpacking why one of the most studied dialects in the world is also still the most misunderstood. The foundational insight of sociolinguistics is that when we talk about how people speak, we aren't just talking about vowels, verbs, and valence, and that's just the V's. On top of the language internal factors, there's an entire external social world where we're talking about identity, power, and the politics of standard English. You've heard it called Ebonics, AAVE, or even just slang and just plain bad English. But the terminology we use carries a heavy weight. To some, the label African American English, AAE, feels like a patronizing box, an implication that black speakers are somehow separate from the correct version of the language. But linguistically, that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, I've moved away from calling it AAE for reasons I'll explain later, but whatever you want to call it, Black English is not a collection of mistakes or low standard accommodation. It is not, as Jeffrey Pullum famously put it, standard English with mistakes. Instead, it's a sophisticated linguistic system with complex grammatical rules and precise, yes, precise phonetic patterns that have been documented by scholars for over half a century. In this video, we're going to explore what the language use in question even is, the euphemism treadmill of these names from Northern Negro English to Ebonics to African American Vernacular English to African American English to African American language to Black English, why the racist label gets tossed around, and why understanding AAE as a distinct variety is actually the key to dismantling the biases we hold against it. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I have a PhD in linguistics from UPenn, where I wrote my dissertation on regional variation in Black English. On the channel, I discuss everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're interested in those topics, don't forget to like and subscribe. Today, we're answering your question: is African American English low-key racist? This is Language Jones. Understanding the internal logic of African American English is really a lesson in how identity and environment shape the way we speak. But this isn't just an English phenomenon. Every language has these deep, rich layers of dialect and register that you just can't find in a textbook. To see how this works in other cultures, I use LingoPie. It's a streaming platform that uses real, scripted and unscripted TV shows and movies to teach you a language as it's actually spoken on the street, not the standard version you learn in school. They have dual subtitles and an interactive click-to-translate feature. If you hear a phrase that sounds non-standard or idiomatic, you can click to see the literal meaning versus the cultural usage. It's basically a laboratory for comparative dialectology. And you think I'm kidding? I can't tell you how many papers I've seen at conferences like NWAVE that use television to build corpora to investigate how people actually talk. With LingoPie, you can dive into 13 different languages. If you want to move beyond the textbook and actually understand the soul of a language, use the link in my description to start a free trial. Oh, and they even have a music section where you can break down lyrics, which is perfect for seeing how rhythm and dialect intersect. Now, just as we see those linguistic shifts in LingoPie's content, AE has its own set of systematic rules that are often misunderstood. First, let me get 3 things out of the way. I know I'm not black. You can still say it in the comments, but I ain't trying to Bobby Caldwell nobody.
That's right. Bobby Caldwell was white.
I grew up in black speech communities, and black folks are my friends, colleagues, and the family that raised me. You ain't gotta come talking about some, who invited him to the cookout? I know who I am, and there's better ways to feel valid about your identity than talking about potato salad. And to be a little more serious about it, there are strong feelings about white people, quote, scientifically observing black folks that come from a long history of trauma. My advisor in grad school was one of the few who basically introduced the idea of science for social good in linguistics, but I get the feeling. Thankfully, doing an analysis of, I don't know, tense aspect and mood and verbal constructions within a linguistic system is just not the same as measuring skulls and shit. Second, Black English is not standard American English or classroom English or whatever you want to call the prestigious, normative, and culturally white way of speaking English that you were more or less explicitly taught in school. But, and this is important, it's also not trying to be that. It's a different language variety with completely different rules about how sounds combine, with a different system of tense, aspect, and mood marking. One that's more complex than classroom English, so more often than not, the black child who tells his teacher, "I been did my homework," is not struggling to say, "I have been doing my homework," and failing. He's struggling to dumb down his more complex grammar for a linguistically incompetent teacher. Is that an inflammatory characterization? Absolutely. Is it linguistically accurate? 100%. I've got entire videos I'll link at the end about verbal conjugation in Black English. In fact, it's so systematic, rule-based, and complex that I'm in the process of co-authoring a descriptive grammar of Black English with Dr. Hiram Smith. If you want to know more about that, you can comment AGOBE, for A Grammar of Black English, or leave me your email at www.languagejones.com/AGOBE. This will really help with the publication process, and I'll provide updates and early access when it's finally published. And if you want to learn more about how linguists think about language and what we mean when we talk about phonology or syntax, you can sign up for early notifications and updates on my upcoming digital course, The Language Blueprint, an introduction to linguistics. It covers all the major subfields. You can sign up at www.languagejones.com/blueprint. And third, the empirical science and the documented history might not align with your assumptions. My last video on Black English got an absurd number of comments that either stated that African American English is actually just a failure to speak a different variety of English, and it's a convoluted conspiracy whereby the Jew is undermining America by propping up degenerate black culture. Where have I heard that before? Or they stated that the transatlantic slave trade never happened. The black man is the real Native American, the Native American is the Jew, and the Jew is a space alien or whatever. You can all feel free to leave those comments here. After all, it's engagement, but I would strongly encourage you to read a few books that are peer-reviewed and not self-published pamphlets. So the question of, is it racist to call it African American English, is predicated on some false assumptions, but it's also based on noticing some real and valid things. First, let's dispel the wrong assumptions. It's a real language variety that has its own rules and is highly systematic. That is, it's linguistically valid. Put even more simply, it's quite distinct from both the linguistic patterns we see from brain damage, developmental issues, and neurodivergence that implicates the language faculty on the one hand, and incomplete or partial linguistic development on the other hand. One reason people think the latter is that some aspects of white Englishes are acquired later in childhood development among children who grow up speaking one of those varieties. For instance, negative polarity items like anybody that are not multiple negation, as in, I ain't seen nobody. However, multiple negation is a completely normal linguistic pattern that is the final form of hundreds, maybe thousands of languages around the world. This means that recognizing it is not the caricature of affirmative action some people have in mind. It's not accepting mistakes and giving a gold star and an A for effort. And my spicy take is that we don't do anybody a service by using the existence of AAE as a justification for not teaching children who speak it natively the tools and skills of classroom English. It should not be an excuse to abdicate our moral responsibility to educate and to give children the tools to succeed. It's just that recognizing and leveraging the actual structures of Black English should be a bridge to teach. And honestly, kids who speak lots of other flavors of American English have to work hard too, to varying degrees, to learn the prestige variety. But simply recognizing the existence of this language variety isn't racist. In fact, pretending it doesn't exist contributes to structural racism. Because if you pretend it doesn't exist, you suddenly have a problem. How do you account for obvious differences in accent and grammar? I can tell you from experience in the classroom and in the courtroom that what people actually do is ascribe it to either laziness, stupidity, or criminality. Suddenly, we're in the intellectual milieu of Tennessee in the 1840s. Remember I mentioned that there are some valid observations implied in the question, though? Well, one is the fact that not all Black people speak that way. And no, I don't just mean the French-speaking West African immigrants on 116th Street in Harlem now. Black folks who are what some call ADOS, the American descendants of slavery, and others simply call blackity black. And I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all. Don't all speak it, and there's a handful of people who aren't Black who do speak it. So, is it racist to claim all Black people speak African American English? I mean, yeah, it's textbook stereotyping and prejudging. There's tons of Black folks that don't speak that language variety, and a handful of non-Black folks who do. And now we get to the most contentious part in academia. What do you call it? The first studies that demonstrated systematic phonological and grammatical patterns talked about Northern Negro English. That just does not fly these days. In the 1970s, you get the term Ebonics from Ebony and Phonics, designed to discuss all New World languages with African influences, so that includes things like Brazilian Portuguese. By the 1990s, that term had been politically skunked and underwent what linguists call pejoration. It came to mean slang and bad and broken English. And of course, it was the 1990s when African American vernacular English was introduced as a term. Nobody loves the term African American more than well-meaning white people in the 90s, especially in the phrase, He just happens to be. Almost immediately, you get pushback from people like Arthur Spears, who point out that there are uniquely black ways of speaking that are in higher and even formal registers, which he refers to as African American Standard English. In the 2010s, a handful of linguists, led primarily by Sanja Lainhart, started popularizing African American language, which has the benefit and detriment of being vague. It can refer to more than just Black English, like Gullah, and it can also sidestep the contentious questions of the origins of the language variety in question, the so-called Creolist and Anglicist approaches. That's often paired with Muse for mainstream US English, which is, in my opinion, too cute by half. All of this is part of the Euphemism Treadmill and is doubled by the changing terms for Black people in the US more broadly. Each new term slowly takes on the negative connotations of its predecessor until a new term is introduced. Dr. Smith and I explain in our descriptive grammar that we prefer Black English for two reasons. First, Black. I don't know too many people who self-identify as African American, and the term African American introduces some vagueness. After all, those Senegalese guys on 116th Street are African American. I mean, hell, Elon Musk self-identifies as African American. Black in the US has come to refer to the specific ethnoculture the language in question is instantiated in. Second, English. While the historical origin, whether mixed language, Creole, fundamentally African, or fundamentally English with Africanisms in it, is unknown and likely unknowable, a Martian who came to Earth and knew linguistic typology and classification would unquestionably determine from the evidence that it is most closely related to varieties of North American English. But of course, when we talk about a language variety, especially when we name one, we're engaged in a social act beyond just a descriptive one, so I'm not going to be out here policing what other people call the language they speak. I don't have time for that. So by now it should be clear. Far from being the racism of low standards, recognition of Black English as its own language variety is just neutral, empirically verifiable observation. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you can support it on YouTube with super thanks or over on Patreon at patreon.com/languagejones. Please leave a comment, they're great for the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're interested in learning linguistics, don't forget to sign up for more information at www.languagejones.com/blueprint. Until next time, happy learning.